know if you don't want to take it now, you can take it later.
Hello, Miss Dunas. How you gonna hurry?
Oh yeah, nice, good message though. Good message. Don't do evil and you won't burn in hell. From a secular band, no doubt. Not a Christian band. Let's do PowerPoints. Back to the Bible. The Bible. Yes, it can't all be fun and games, Mr. Hinkle, but we could all run off and join the circus. But You've got a job to do, right? I don't know if I'm going to make it through the class, Mr. Henkel, looking at that. I'll have to look around you, sir. Mr. Henkel. All righty, what are we talking about? The Bible, where do we stop? Is there anything I want to say first? Remember, quiz 3 is tomorrow. So we're basically, you got paper. I finally finished, thanks be to God, all of paper 1 done. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email or something if you have questions. But so you're done with that, and it's just quizzes, right? So it's just quizzes in the final exam, and the final exam is basically all the quizzes. There'll be some extra questions because of stuff that I'll cover after quiz 5 or quiz 4. But so if you're doing the quizzes, you're basically studying for the final. Yes.
Where'd you get your paper?
Off of Amazon. Yeah. Just, what am I supposed to be? I'm an 80s metalhead, but a Christian one. How do you know I'm a Christian one, Miss Hoy? That's all right,
Sure.
Yeah, Striper. Isaiah 53:5. Yes, by his stripes we were healed, Mr. Tedeschi. Prophecy. Anyways, so that's done. Okay. I would recommend, I hope probably just whistling in the wind or trying to blow smoke during a hurricane. No pun intended. Yes.
See the quiz.
Quiz number 3? Well, it wouldn't be, would it?
Is that tomorrow?
Yes. Why would it be up tomorrow, Mr. Hinkle?
Is that
How do you know that, sir? I did. I was going to say it, but I didn't. Did I actually say it? I had it in my mind. Did I actually say the words? Okay. But it's also in the syllabus, Ms. Hoy. So make a calendar for yourself. Do that with all your classes. Just go to the syllabus, print out a calendar from the internet, and just mark the days on when you have different stuff due, when it's going to happen. And it's right there. You just look at it and it's there. Or put it into your phone and Google will tell you. But papers were, what they were. They were what they were. What can I say? Thinking and writing are skills, just like STEM. I know no one cares about the arts anymore. It's all STEM. They all want you to build robots and write code, but you still, code has to be logical, right? Garbage in, garbage out. If you don't know how to think logically or think ahead or whatever, pre-plan, then isn't that the same? Isn't planning already kind of doing it before? Well, anyways, pre-planning. So, anyways, but thinking and writing are skills as well. You have to work at them. They're not easy. They're not easy. And you're now in university, and I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do. I'm not an English teacher, and I'm not here to grade your grammars up, but I have to if your grammar's terrible and you don't know how to write. And if you feel like you got screwed over by your high school, your grammar school, I think it's probably high school where things kind of just move them on, right? Just move them on, get them out, because they can't expel you anymore. They haven't been able to expel people for decades if you're a bad influence. You're not going to flunk out of high school. Let's put it that way. And worst comes to worst, you're probably not going to flunk out of here either. You'd have to really do, Mr. Rosley, really try. Because I'm pulling for you, man. 3 points today for Mr. Hinkle. I should just give you your A already because you already have so many extra credit points. Sheesh. Anyways, I can't change that. All right. I'm sorry. Okay. So you're gonna have to do it yourself. Get a grammar, get a dictionary, get a thesaurus, go online, start learning how to write. Take philosophy here. If you don't want to do a minor in religious studies, do a minor in philosophy. Okay, I majored in philosophy in college. Stupidly, I majored. Okay, that was my stupidity. I wanted to be a priest, and you needed philosophy to get into the seminary. Well, I didn't plan if that didn't work out, right? And it didn't work out. So what do you do with a philosophy degree? How does that look put on your application for Chipotle? Anyways, yes, I am going to teach today, but this is also part of teaching because people don't do, I didn't have professors that actually did this for me when I was a student. They didn't teach me how to write. I was in high school, I did have a great English teacher who taught me how to write an essay and a research paper, but I didn't know until I was getting my master's degree, how to actually start really formatting an essay in a paper because a friend showed me. I was still doing it single space. I was writing single space papers. Yeah. Huh? It's not on the one that's on Canvas? That's weird. But this is the one I've been using. Maybe I took it off. All right. Can I see what you have? Is that all right? Thanks. Yeah. Oh, it is? Okay, so I must have taken that out because I decided I wasn't going to talk about it. All right, so I won't talk about it. Thank you, Ms. Lacey. I'll give you an extra credit point for that. Please remind me. So yeah, I was still writing stuff single spaced, whatever font and stuff like that. And one of my friends was like, man, what? Because I was complaining to him about we had to write a paper for some class in the seminary. And I'm like, geez, it's just so long and whatever. He's like, well, what are you doing? And I said to him, he's a priest now, too. Been a priest for like 20 years, I guess. He's like, Matt, why are you doing that? That's not the standard. The standard is 12-point font, either Times New Roman or Courier New. You always want to choose Courier New because it's a little bit bigger, takes up more space. Wink, wink, Ms. Via. Double spaced, always, not single spaced. 1-inch margins, not like half-inch margins. Oh, but that's the way I did it in college when I submitted my senior thing. He saved me. At least helped me out. So I'm trying to help you out. You need to, if you're a really poor writer, you just work on it. All right. It is a good skill. And you're just going to have to work on it if you're poor at it. And some of you, I'm sorry to say, I'm not pointing at any fingers, but some of you are very poor writers. And that just might be because you don't write well. Not everyone can write well and stuff. But at least you want to think and be curious. So take philosophy. Take some of our philosophy. Do a minor in philosophy because you might not remember it or ever use it. When's the last time I had an in-depth conversation over the fryer, with somebody about Hegel, Gottfried Hegel or Nietzsche's view of Christianity or God is dead theory and stuff. No, never. Okay. That's not going to happen. It's more for helping you think and identify stuff. Identify, especially when your thinking is wrong. Okay. All right. So as Miss Lacey showed, I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to go into the synoptics. I talked about the Gospels, their relationships. I will quickly tell you their relationships, but I'm not going to go in depth because, yes, I do want to move on from it. But talking about the Gospels, we already know that Mark is believed to have been written first. Okay? All right, Mark, whoops. Fool me once, shame on me, but fool me like 30 times. What does that make me? Makes me a moron. Anyways, but Mark was written first. So what about Matthew and Luke? Well, or John, okay? Well, Matthew and Luke seem to have copied Mark, okay? Because almost every verse of Mark is found in Matthew and Luke. So there's, number one, there's clearly a relationship that all of the stories, like 99% of the stories that are told in Mark's gospel appear or reappear, if that makes any sense, in both Matthew and Luke. So there's some kind of relationship. Most scholars, New Testament scholars, say that they copied some version of Mark. All right, maybe. Again, I wasn't there, so I don't know what either one of them did. But there is clearly a relationship. And there is probably a close relationship with Mark, just because a lot of times the vocabulary, what do I want to say? Man, it's dark back here. Should have been some lights. The words are the same, like almost exactly the same in the stories that are recounted. They, in addition to them telling the same stories as Mark, they frequently tell the same stories in the same order as they're found in Mark. So A comes after B, story A, then B, then C. And we see that, no pun intended, Mr. Closa, in the other gospels. So maybe it's a really close relationship, like they copied from Mark. But you might have noticed when you read the Gospel of Matthew, did anyone actually do that to Matthew, or Ms. Walker? God bless you. Bless you. Anybody?
Me.
I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot. I'm not going to think less of you if you didn't, but I'm just hopeful that maybe a handful of people might have done it. It's there. You should have done it, yes, but I didn't do every meeting in college or university. So you might have noticed that Matthew has more material than Mark, more stories, a lot more dialogue, a lot more sayings of Jesus, and so does Luke. So there seems, and these sayings of Jesus, mostly sayings, if you compare Matthew's and Luke's, they're very similar as well. Almost the same words, but not quite. But they're very similar in content. So there's another source that's posited by scholars that Matthew and Luke seem to have also used, in addition to something like the Gospel of Mark, and that is a thing called Q. Don't ask me what Q is, because we don't know. It's a traditional thing for this material that Matthew and Luke share, but is not in Mark. You'll frequently read in books that it comes from the German word Quelle, but actually we just don't know where it comes from. It just started being used among scholars to identify this material. Just like LXX was used to identify the Septuagint, or the version, the various manuscripts of the Septuagint, canon. Q identifies all that material, mostly sayings of Jesus, that are found in Matthew and Luke, but don't occur in Mark. All right, so there seems to be a relationship there beyond Mark, something Mark didn't know. This is also, just to throw this out there, one of the reasons why a lot of scholars will say that Matthew was not an apostle. It can't be Matthew the apostle who wrote Matthew's gospel, because why would he use Mark's gospel or base his own gospel on the work of someone who was not an eyewitness, right? Mark was a disciple of Peter, I told you. Yes, Ms. Burris? Yes? Mark knew Peter, but Mark didn't apparently know Jesus. Okay? So why would Matthew, an apostle, one of the 12, decide to use this gospel by someone who wasn't an eyewitness, That makes kind of some sense, right? If you're supposing. Supposing is supposing. I can also suppose that, Matthew may have decided that Mark did such a good job, there was no point to rewrite it. He did want to write a gospel, but maybe he used Mark's gospel as a base because it was good. It's what he wanted to say, maybe. And save time, save him the effort. And then he added on all sorts of other stuff that he knew that Mark didn't include in his gospel. He added things to it. Maybe. I'm supposing too, Mr. Gadd. How do you know I'm wrong? Or right? Yeah. How do I know that most New Testament scholars are right by that argument? Oh, Matthew wouldn't have used someone else's work. Why not? People plagiarize all the time. Anyways, and then John's gospel. John is so different that John is viewed independently. John does not seem to know of any of the other gospels because he tells completely different stories about Jesus. And there are one or two places where he shares some stories with the other gospels, but even then he tells them in such a different way that he might have a different tradition. But John's an art. I look at John, they're all artists, but I look at John kind of like Prince, the musician Prince, who died a number of years ago, or many years ago, who called himself the artist. That's how I like to refer to himself, not as Prince or what his real name was, I forget. The artist. Anyone hear of this guy? Know of him? Yeah. He was a Jehovah's Witness, right? He was a religious man. He was a Jehovah's Witness. He used to go door to door from time to time. knocking on people's door, talking, handing out Jehovah's Witness literature. Here's this big superstar, millionaire, legend in the music industry, putting on a baseball cap. Would you like to live forever in paradise on earth? Why, yes, maybe. So John is very different, and John is seen to be independent. That's all I'm going to say. Moving on. The next thing we have is a history. Histories, which is Acts of the Apostles. Okay, why is it called, why do I have Luke Acts on there? Because our friend Luke that I was just talking about, who wrote a gospel, actually he wrote up 2 parts to his gospel. And actually it was a singular work. The first part was the gospel about Jesus, but then he wrote a second work called Acts of the Apostles, which is kind of like a history, not in the modern sense, kind of like a history of the early church, the outgrowth of the early church, the Jesus movement. So really, they both go together, and scholars call them Luke Acts because they really do go together. But because they're different genres of literature, the gospel is separated out and placed amongst the gospels, and Acts, the history, is put as its own. Okay, but just so you know, Luke is the author of both, we think. Because again, even Acts doesn't identify who the author is, but traditionally it's this guy Luke. Written, obviously, if Luke wrote the gospel as part 1 and this is part 2, which does seem to be, logically and literarily, then it has to come after the gospel. So sometime in the 80s or 90s, like the gospel. So, Luke wrote his gospel in 85, sometime between 85 and after, he wrote Acts of the Apostles. And as I said, it just gives we'll talk about Acts more deeply in the next class when we start talking about the church, because, it's all about the church and the growth of the church. From Jerusalem, where Christ died and rose again, and if you read Acts of the Apostles, it starts out in Jerusalem in chapter 1, but by chapter 23 or 24? 26 chapters? Okay. 26 chapters. Well, someone could check for me if you wanted. Not you, Mr. Henkel, because you're crushing it on the extra credit points. But you need some help, maybe. Nor you, Ms. Lacey, because you're too clever by half. What does that mean? If someone's too clever by half, why not too clever by double? Why not double? Why just half? Anyways, at the end of Acts of the Apostles, it ends in the city of Rome in Italy. Okay? So from Luke's perspective, the gospel has reached to the ends of the earth. Now, as you and I both know, Mr. Palumbo, Italy is not even the end of Europe, right? Because if you keep going west, you've got France and Spain, other countries. Of course, you have Africa below it, a few hundred miles below the Italian peninsula. So, but from the perspective of an ancient person in the Mediterranean world and the Roman Empire was the world, and the capital of the Roman Empire was Rome. So Jerusalem, the center of the Jesus movement, where it starts, and by the time the gospel reaches Rome, that symbolizes for Luke that it's reached the whole world, which we know it hasn't, but go with it. It's his point of view. That's what he's trying to say with that. So now everybody should know about Jesus. Okay, I don't know how the people in Australia were supposed to know him as doing this. Or, people in like South America, that no one knew about. Well, they knew they were there. They didn't know about us. They didn't know about Africa and Europe and Asia, just like we didn't know about them. So obviously the gospel was not, everyone had not heard about Jesus. People made that assumption. But it's a symbol. It's, he's not trying to make a real literal statement. It's a symbol of Luke. Then we have letters, and letters really form the bulk of the New Testament. And in some ways, the letters are more important than the Gospels, Ms. Robbins. How can that be so? Maybe I lost her. Maybe I should say it in heavy metal speech. Maybe I should say it in heavy metal. The letters can in some ways be more important than the Gospels. What do you do? Go to like comedy clubs and stuff like that, and the guy tells a joke and gets a big laugh. No, say that joke again. I missed it. Maybe I'll do it again this way. We'll see what happens. We see what transpires. Anywho, letters. Why could they be more important than the Gospels? Well, historically, they're more important than the Gospels because look at the dates. The letters that we have date from 50 AD to around 125. So why is that significant? 50 AD to 125. Why would that be significant in relation if you compare those dates to the gospel dates? Anybody? Anybody? Ms. Cottrell? 50 AD? Huh? Yeah. Well, Ms. Cottrell, when was the first gospel written? When do scholars imagine it was written? First gospel is Mark, right? Thank you. When do scholars think it was written? Ms. Cottrell. Not sure? Huh? But don't you have the PowerPoint open on your computer? Aren't you following along? Ralphie? When was Mark's gospel written? At the earliest. Yeah, I thought so.
Let me look to the PowerPoint.
Good. Good. Go ahead.
to 100.
60 to 100. Vamo. Yes. No. What does 60 100 to 100 mean? Why is that on the PowerPoint? Yeah, it's kind of, yeah. But why is it there? What was written between 60 AD and 100 AD? What? Mr. Hinkle?
The first gospel.
The first gospel? Is that what it says on the PowerPoint? Ms. Jones? Ah.
The four holy.
Yeah, the four holy gospels were written during that time period, but not the Gospel of Mark. What's the earliest? Well, you could extrapolate from those numbers to the earliest time for Mark. What's that, Ms. Jones?
65 to 70.
Yeah, around 65, maybe, midway through the 60s. So, Ms. Lacey, comparing that with the letters, the dates of the letters, the earliest letters, what might you extrapolate about their importance? Well, okay, yeah. Well, the United States has been around for a long time, 250 years, right? This year?
Next year.
Huh? Really?
Yes.
What other country is older?
You had a lesson.
I don't listen.
What other country is older? All right, you want to throw down? Game on. What other country is older?
European countries.
Really? Like?
France.
Really? When was the French Republic founded?
Oh. 1500. It's like saying the United States was only founded when the Civil War happened.
No. No, because we had the same government going from 1789 when we had the U.S. Constitution. Before that, we had the Articles. But the French are working on like their third or fourth republic right now. But the first republic, when did that come about?
First,
1792.
1792? With the French Revolution, yes? So, no, good try, good, yes. France has been, those people have been around for a long time. China as a country? I think Mao Zedong was in the 1950s, wasn't it? The Maoist revolution? Because they had a civil war and they split between Taiwan, the losing side got Taiwan, and China, the communists got it.
So they make the argument that the United States, like, well, there's a war, we're technically not the ones who say that.
You mean but the United States ceased to exist?
well, China still
You
exists.
mean the Civil War disfounded the United States of America that didn't exist anymore? And it was refounded after? No, I'm saying, when's it founded? When's the country founded? France, 1792, the 1950s for modern day China. Before that, they did have a republic in the 1940s, which was overthrown.
It's still the same country, just because someone else takes it over.
Yeah, but it's a different government, right? It went from being a republic to being a communist dictatorship.
It had a different style,
Different constitution.
but it's still the same country.
Sure.
China's existed since 221.
And probably longer than that, yeah, when they finally. Do you think Native Americans were around then too? Americans were around then?
Although they didn't have one unified country.
Well, even the Chinese. It depends on what you mean by a country. The Aztecs seem to. The Inca seem to.
Yeah, they were basically countries.
Sure. What are their days?
They no longer exist, but they exist.
Okay. Now, how did I go down this rabbit hole? Well, I led this down, and I'm to blame for this, Ms. Dugas. I apologize. But it is an interesting conversation. That's why, sorry. I'm not challenging you. It's a I find it fascinating. But why was I, oh, yes.
What about terrorists?
Yeah.
This turn.
But if you look into modern nations, just look it up and prove me wrong. The modern nation of Egypt. We're one of the oldest. We are one of the oldest. Anywho, nevertheless, look at the dates. What does that tell you? 50 versus 65, Mr. Closer. So why would that make the letters important? It would make it more historically important than the Gospels. I got you, but I asked Mr. Closer. Give her a chance. What do you think, Mr. No, Mr. Closer. No. Ms. Villa, what do you think? What do you think, Ms. Villa? Ms. Dumas?
It's the real one.
About what? Okay. Do you want some more candy, or? At least what? 21. Are we still on that? You gotta prove me wrong, don't you? All right, you gotta prove me wrong. I was just joking when I said game on, but I should have known who I was dealing with. All right. All right. What's the number one? What does it say? What's the number one? I'm curious. Oh, really? Portugal? What date?
1143.
Really? Well, that's interesting. Modern? Really? Under its modern constitution or under its monarchy? Yeah, because it's not a monarchy anymore. Modern 11?
Modern.
Is that Wikipedia?
No, probably.
That's interesting.
You need a brush.
No, you need a scrunchie.
Maybe a haircut.
Mr. Rosley, I'm dying here. Well, it seems to me, I'm not very good at math, Ms. Miller, but it seems to me that 50 is like 10 to 15 years earlier, depending on whether Mark was written in 65 or a little bit earlier in 60. Yes? Which means to me that whatever is the earliest of the letters is, by at least a decade about Ms. Robbins, right? Earlier than the earliest gospel. Not that there weren't stories about Jesus, but that's our earliest writing, yeah? So that would make it pretty important. Which writing do scholars think, out of all the New Testament letters, was probably first? Huh?
For the letter.
Who said Mark? Who said
Never
Mark?
mind, never mind.
Mark?
You said letters.
That's all right. That's all right. All right. You guys said Portugal. Anyways, I'm a bad. Whoa, wait a second. Twisted Sister cell burn in hell. Sorry, Ms. Lacey. I'll repent. The first letter to the Thessalonians. The first letter to the Thessalonians. If you want to read what we believe is the earliest Christian text in existence,
Which one?
it's the first letter to the Thessalonians in the New Testament, written around 50 AD by this man Paul. Most of the letters are written by this man Paul the Apostle. Paul the Apostle. We'll talk about him a little bit later when we talk about the apostles. But yeah, so most of the letters in the New Testament are him. And the bulk of the New Testament writings are from this man Paul or in relation to him, interestingly enough, not in relation to Jesus. And Paul doesn't write a gospel. I mean, in his letter to the Thessalonians, if you go and read it, it's relatively short. He talks about Jesus, but he's not proclaiming the gospel because he's already writing to Christians who know the story. Usually in the letters, what's going on is he's dealing with problems in the local community. There are issues, the Christians there aren't doing the right things, or they have questions about their beliefs about Jesus, or other stuff, and he has to correct them. So, you might be surprised if you read the letters to find that Paul almost never quotes from Jesus or any of the Gospels. He does quote from Scripture, but it's the Old Testament. He doesn't quote any of the Gospels, not one. So the letters, we mostly from St. Paul. We have another thing that's called a letter to the Hebrews, which is anonymous, so we don't know who wrote that. It's usually ascribed again to Paul, but most scholars think no. And actually, it shouldn't really even be a letter. It should be separated. It's actually another genre of literature, a homily or a sermon that someone, kind of turned into copied down and then sent out to people as a letter. So it gets called a letter, but it's not really a letter, actually. But whatever, just go with it. And then we have some other letters by other Christians. Peter, who, if it's Peter, then we know who, that's such an unusual name. We know it means Simon Peter, the apostle of Jesus. But all these others, James, John, and Jude, are such common names. Yes, there are apostles with these names, but there are other people with these names. And they don't identify themselves as apostles specifically. Could be, could not be, but we just don't know in some cases. And in the case of the letters of John, actually, that are attributed to John, there's no name at all given. It's the elder. All the guy does is call himself the elder, So you have no idea who that is. Could be John the Apostle. Out of the letters from Paul, however, and of which we have, 13 letters of Paul, a little over half are deemed authentic. Actually coming from Paul the Apostle, yes? Coming directly from him. The letter to the Romans, the 2 letters to the church in Corinth, letter to the Galatians. Holla. Any other Irish in the room? Holla. O'Brien, yeah. Is that still a thing or no? Is that 2000s? Okay.
For sure.
Why? What would you say now if you're driving down the street and you see your friends? Hey. Okay. Ms. O'Brien, okay. You.
Oh.
Yo.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, O'Brien, that seems definitely, I'm not trying to be stereotypical, but, maybe Gaffney. Gaffney? Could be Scots. It is Irish? Okay. I don't know. Hinkle, is that English, Scot,
Pretty sure it's Irish.
British? Okay. Well, anyways, we're in the Bible too. The Galatas, the Celts. Galatas, the Celts. I'll never say Celts again. But yeah, there are a whole bunch of Irish and bunch of Irish ethnic groups living in central Turkey around the time that Paul wrote a letter to. Not a happy letter, so at least I know that my people were doing their job, making life difficult for St. Paul. Philippians is like the one letter where Paul is happy. The Philippians are actually living the life, so it's called the letter of joy, letter to the Philippians, because Paul uses the word rejoicing and joy over and over again throughout the letter. So Philippians, which we know from the Christ hymn, yes? Then First Thessalonians, and then Philemon, which is not a place, it's a person. This man Philemon, who owned a slave, and his slave ran away to Paul, and Paul sends him back. After he converted him to Christ, but nevertheless, he tried to get Philemon to give him to Paul, but, you know, he wasn't the owner, so sent him back. Those were the days. And I don't mean in a good sense. I'm just saying those were the days. He does try to persuade him, though, to give him over to Paul, to work for Paul. I guess as a slave. I don't know what Paul meant, but, you could see it as kind of he was asking for his freedom in a kind of nod, wink, wink way. Let him go. He's a brother Christian now. He shouldn't be a slave. All right, so most of these letters that we have from Paul come from the regions of Greece and Turkey. I just wanted to show you. Okay, whoops. Why is that going up? There we go. So, places like not Ephesus, but Corinth is in Greece. It's down here on this little isthmus, this little bit of land connecting two larger bits of land, which is called an isthmus. Thessalonica is still in existence. The city of Thessaloniki, still there. So 2 letters to them. Philippi is in this area as well, but it's an archaeological site. The city doesn't exist anymore. Okay? And then the rest of the letters that I mentioned, Galatia is here in central Turkey, and then other letters like that I'll get to in a minute, Colossians, Colossae, Ephesus. What was the other, whatchamacallit, that I'm thinking of? Well, they're here in Western Turkey, modern Turkey. Okay? And then you have the Romans, of course, Rome, the city of Rome. Okay, so that's over in Italy. But most of the letters are addressed to people in Greece and Turkey by Paul, where Paul was a missionary. So that makes sense. That's where he founded communities. So it makes perfectly logical sense that he would be sending letters. His letters would be located in these regions. Philemon, we don't know where Philemon lived. When we get to the letter of Titus, well, Titus was in Crete, this island down here, so we know that it's down there. Is there anything else I want to say about that? Well, we'll see. Then we have other letters which scholars think are pseudepigraphies, which is a fancy word for forgery. False writing, false writing. Pseudos means false, pseudo, graphe or grapho in Greek means to write something or writing, so false writing. So, in the ancient world, it was not necessarily uncommon for someone to attribute a writing to someone else who was a well-known figure, okay, as a way to honor them. They weren't trying to necessarily be deceptive. In some cases, they were, and those were true forgeries, and that was looked upon negatively. But in other cases, it was to honor the person, even though you might be putting a lot of your own teachings in the person's mouth, or you're trying to just summarize the person's teachings. So the most famous example of that would be like the dialogues of Plato, in which if you've taken philosophy, you know about Plato and Socrates. Scholars still debate today, philosophers, how much of it is Plato's own philosophy, how much of it is accurate recording of Socrates' ideas. We don't know, okay? But no one says, like, the Phaedrus or the Republic, or Plato's Theaetetus, or all these other dialogues, where Plato is not a character at all. It's all Socrates. No one says they're forgeries. I don't think they're inauthentic. but they think he's honoring his teacher Socrates by writing in his name. And maybe some well-meaning Christian or Christians did that with Paul. For example, with like the letter to the Ephesians, Colossians. It's a question mark because, there's a large number of scholars who aren't sure about Colossians. There are a lot, it's probably 50-50. 50 say no, not from Paul. 50 say yes. Second Thessalonians, notice, Second Thessalonians is considered non-Pauline. And then letters to these two people. We know First and Second Timothy. We've encountered the letter to Timothy. And we haven't encountered yet maybe the letter to Titus, but we will. It's the guy Titus. Yes. Well, what are the, I don't lose any sleep over, I think they're all from Paul. I'll tell you right out. I think 100% of them are from Paul. Well, I shouldn't say 100%. There are gradations. Some are, I think, pretty clearly I would accept as Pauline. Some, no, I am kind of 100% on most of them. Because the arguments aren't good. The arguments for them not being from Paul, from some being from Paul and some not being from Paul, is a lot of it's based on language and ideas. And so ideas that Paul writes about in the letter to the Romans, for example, which is one of his later letters, or the Corinthian correspondence, or in Philippians, they don't appear in the non-authentic letters. Or if they appear, they don't seem to be using the ideas in the same way that Paul seems to consistently use them in his authentic letters, true letters, So something's up. Scholars think something's up, It's someone else writing. It can't be Paul. The language is in many ways different and the ideas are different. It's kind of like statistics. You move a number to one column to another, you can change all sorts of things, And I went, oh, wait, let me see Miss Lacey. Oh, no, there she is. Anyways, I'm not dissing statistics, those of you for, social work and counseling and stuff like that, psychology, right? You have to take statistics. You have to take a statistics class. Okay? I took it when I was in college. It was interesting. I'm not dissing it, but you can manipulate it. You have to be aware of that. You can, if you change your standards, okay? And to me, literary stuff like this, just basing it on literary evidence, how these things are written, to me is like statistics. How do you know how Paul wrote? We have no control group here. We have nothing that we actually know. This letter was directly written by this man, Paul of Tarsus. We can absolutely confirm it, We don't. So right there, we have no control group to compare it to. But wait a second. We have all these letters that we're pretty sure Paul did write, right? Problem solved. We just compare them to some of the other letters that we think are by Paul, and we're like, wait a second. Doesn't seem the same. Right? Is that close? Game, set, match. QED, Mr. Palumbo. Except there's a problem with that. Most scholars, for example, like 99% of New Testament scholars, and even those who specialize in Paul's writings would say that, the letter to the Romans is clearly authentically by Paul. Clearly it comes from Paul. In fact, it's the masterpiece of his theology. It represents the encapsulation of like the whole message Paul has been preaching for the last few decades. Okay? It's a wonder work. Clearly by him. So when I compare Romans, for example, to 2 Thessalonians, and I see how different they are, what am I to do with that? Well, I must assume that the Romans, which is authentic, is telling me, the evidence is showing me that 2 Thessalonians is by another hand. But it says it's by Paul himself. All right, they're just using the name of Paul. Okay, so we've got some steps we're following here, making some assumptions. Oh, it is Halloween. Romans chapter 16. Would anyone like to read Romans chapter 16, beginning with verse 21? Romans, and while you're looking for that, I'll just tell you, at the end of Paul's letter to the Romans, Paul did not found the Church of Rome. There was a group of Christians there before him, but he's going to arrive there and he wants to explain himself to the Christian community and maybe even defend himself and what he has been teaching. And, you know, in letters, near the end of letters, you greet people that you know in the community. You say hello. And so he does. He gives, chapter 16, he gives a long list of greetings to people he knows in the Roman church. Some of them are even his relatives. Then we get down to verse 21, and we have some other greetings by some other people that want to say hello as well, not just Paul. Other people, you know, are like, oh, if you're sending a letter, oh, could you say hello for me as well? You know, could you say hello to so-and-so? I know her in the Roman church. And okay, you know, Julius wants to say hello to Cybele. Why don't you just go before? I went before. Anyways, yes, Ms. Walker. Go ahead. Thank you.
Lucius, Jason, and how you say that?
Sosipater.
Who wrote down this letter, greet you in the Gaius, whose hospitality I and the whole church in enjoy, sends you his greeting.
Erastus.
Erastus.
Erastus. Good.
Who is and our brother Hortus
Yeah.
sends you their greetings. Now to him who is able to
That verse is not in a lot of manuscripts, so they're keeping it. Yes, I got you, Ms. Walker, but that verse is cut out because it's probably not part of the original letter to the Romans. It might have been, but a lot of the earliest manuscripts don't have it. Okay, so here in the final verses of Paul's, there's no problem with that, Ms. Walker. I'm just wanting you to know why I stopped you. That okay. In these final comments, you know, there are people asking Paul to include their greetings in his own letter. Timothy, my co-worker, so my colleague, our friend Timothy is mentioned. I'm assuming it's the same Timothy that the letters were written to. Wants to greet Lucius and Jason and Sosipater, my relatives. Now, when Paul says my relatives, does he mean they're Paul's relatives or they're Timothy's relatives? And he's using my for Timothy, not for, you know what I'm saying? Don't know. I wasn't there when Paul was writing it. Man, these are some great names, though. I mean, if your Christians are having kids, give them some biblical names, you know, Sosipater. Isn't that, huh? Come on, Sosipater. That's fantastic. Lucius, Erastus, Andronicus. Andronicus. Could you imagine the kindergarten teacher having to deal with your kid named Andronicus? That's fantastic. I mean, a good Tryphena for a girl, or Tryphosa. Tryphosa. Actually, those sound like medications they'd be selling in the commercials. You know, try Tryphosa and you'll get rid of that skin rash. You know. Anywho, so they're sending greetings. Gaius wants to send greetings to you. Erastus, the city treasurer. This is interesting because we've found archaeological evidence for this man's Erastus, the city treasurer. So we know he existed. They find an inscription of some, I think some roadway that he helped fund or something like that. Road project. Okay, what does anyone see a problem though with what Ms. Walker read and the argument for the authenticity of these letters? Does anyone see a problem? Like a red flag that's just shouting out to you like, and all of these greetings? Not but embedded in the greetings, does someone else identify himself?
Does it itch?
Yeah, it does, and it's hot. Miss Miller!
Verse 22 says, I
Tertius, yeah.
Tertius.
Why could that be a problem for the argument about who wrote Paul's letter?
Paul's handwriting. Is someone else handwriting?
Who's Tertius? Who's Tertius? Probably a secretary. That was very common in the ancient world. You know, especially if you had to write multiple letters and you need multiple copies. We have various people writing down what you wrote. Hopefully they're all copying the same thing. But normally, you know, if you're a busy person, you know Paul was busy. He was moving around a lot, founding a lot of churches and dealing with a lot of issues. But again, I wasn't there, so I don't know. Yeah, he could have been physically by his own hand writing every letter. Although in some cases we know he wasn't, because in some of the letters, well, Colossians is one. Is it, what's the other one? Maybe it's the other one. Well, anyways, there are two letters where he actually signs the letter. He says, this is my own hand. This is how I write, to verify that it's truly from him. Well, he's been writing the letter himself. You know, you can't tell how he writes. He's been writing the letter. So what's his signature got to do with anything, you know, to show? But so clearly he did not write the letter. Someone else wrote it for him. He like stamped it like a notary public, you know, to the library and notarize a document. It's like, now you see how I write. This is my signature. Okay? So we have this, probably a secretary. That's fine. Okay, that's fine. But we know definitely that Paul did not write Romans, even though it says it's from Paul himself. It's not from Paul. Tertius wrote it for Paul. Okay? And it's kind of interesting if you read it in the original Greek, which I used an interlinear Bible because my Greek sucks. But I could see the Greek with the English, so I was trying to read the Greek and look at the English as well. And it is interesting. There are parts of the letter that are written very well. They're very easy to read. And then there are parts of the written that are very choppy, like someone would be talking, you know? Not very grammatical. The thoughts are kind of scattered and stuff like that. And that's what a secretary would do. The secretary would take notes of what you're saying and would take them together and then compose the letter and would, tighten up the ideas, correct grammar and stuff like that, but keep your original intent of what you're trying to say, okay? And sometimes they might even add their own stuff. As like here, Tertius takes it upon himself to say, I, Tertius, also want to send greetings to the people, the Christians in Rome. So how can you use Romans to judge these letters by their language? How can you use the language of Romans? Because how do you know which is Paul and which is Tertius? Again, there's no control. There's a lack of control. If any of you are taking science classes, know that that's a big boo-boo in the scientific method. You need something to control things by, and you have none other than the scholar's opinion. Oh, all right. What might rub some scholars the wrong way about these letters? Oh, things like, they mention bishops, elders, deacons. So they talk about an authority structure in the church, tradition, sacred tradition, and passing on the tradition about Jesus. Stuff like that. You have to remember a lot of the biblical scholars in the 1800s, when biblical studies really kind of reached its, was born and maybe in the 1700s and then kind of got going in the 1800s. A lot of them, just as historical fact, really, I'm not trying to be biased. There were some Catholics, but the majority of them were Lutheran Protestants or Presbyterians who did not place a lot of stock in sacred tradition or an authority structure, a hierarchy in the church. And so they dismissed these letters. These can't be from Paul, because Paul is the great Protestant icon, like Ronald Reagan for the Republicans, right? Or Barack Obama for Democrats. Paul is the icon. We're saved by faith. We're saved by grace. We have the scriptures as our final authority. Paul doesn't really teach that, but okay, let's go with it. But then you come to like these almost like hitting a pothole in the road when you get to some of these letters where Paul's talking about, telling Titus to establish bishops and telling Timothy that he has to assert his authority and teach correct doctrine. It sounded Catholic. In fact, they called it that. They called it, because they were all mostly German as well, Frühkatholizismus, early Catholicism. So that couldn't be Paul. All right, maybe that's true. I'm giving you the idea. Maybe there's validity to that. I'm not saying they're wrong necessarily. I do think they're wrong. But I think they're wrong because I don't think you find authority structures throughout Paul's letters. Paul is always throwing around his weight as an apostle and stuff like that. So I can disagree just on the documents themselves. But just ideologically, I think you just go if you have no control, then as I said, Mr. Tedeschi, all you've got is your bias. What you think Paul would have done. What you think as a Lutheran, what I think as a Catholic. I think Paul could have done all of that. As an I'm Catholic. Well, of course you would say that, Yeah, that's true. Of course I would say that. But that's not why I'm presenting it as proof that I'm right, because it's my opinion, and I have to be aware that I might be reading my opinion into Paul's letters. I'm going with the historical evidence, the tradition that Paul did write all these letters. If you can find some early Christians, very early, who are writing about some of these letters and saying, we have questions about it. Not all people accept these letters as from Paul. Now we've got some historical data. Now I'm taking notice. Literary arguments, I'm like, yeah, I can make the same arguments from my point of view. How do we know which of us is right? But if one of the early Christians are like, we received the tradition, Romans definitely comes from Paul, but the letters from Timothy, they say they're from Paul, but some churches say no. They were written by somebody else in the movement. Maybe. I'll listen to that evidence. That's good. I think that's good evidence. It still doesn't mean it's right. It could still be from Paul using a secretary. And the same thing goes for these other letter writers as well. People will say, well, the two letters that say they're from Simon Peter, one of the apostles of Jesus, maybe the first one could be, but definitely not the second one. Do you think a fisherman would write such a beautiful letter? I can think a lot of things, Miss Hoy. And a fisherman with a secretary who's literate and knows how to write, yeah. Which would make sense, especially if you're a fisherman who doesn't speak Greek and is illiterate. But you want to get your message out there. Who are you going to do? Hey, can you help me? You get a tutor, right, Miss Farley? The tutor speaks Greek. All right, so the letters. Then finally we have, thanks be to God, we have the Apocalypse of John, apocalyptic literature. Oh yes, this makes for good horror movies, Christian as well as secular, end of the world movies, end times movies, some asteroid smashing into the planet and killing us all, or some nuclear disaster, or some viral plague. Those are all apocalyptic. They're apocalyptic literature, but in film form. Literature that interprets history through symbolic visions of the future and of the spiritual world. So in the apocalyptic literature, you get a lot of visions of heaven and the spiritual world. Okay? A lot of things, we're looking for signs of the end of the world, and stuff like that. Prophecies fulfilled, weird things that happen, like a goat gives birth to a litter of snakes or something, Ooh. Anyone see the movie the Seven Seal, Demi Moore, I think it was the 90s, it was the late 80s. Was it the Seventh Seal or the Seventh Sign? No, I think it was the Seventh Seal. With Demi Moore. You want to know who Demi Moore is still? No one knows who Demi Moore is anymore. Seventh Seal. It's an apocalyptic film about Christ comes back and he's going around the world breaking seals, wax seals on parchment paper, and then as he breaks each seal, certain plagues come into play across the world. The oceans turn into blood and the sea creatures die, and what else happens? Hail starts happening, all sorts of other things. I didn't like them. I liked the first half, I didn't like the rest. If anyone's seen like version, ever seen Cloverfield? Huh? Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of a it's science fiction, but it's kind of a version of apocalyptic. You got some alien creature who's like bound to destroy the whole world and stuff like that. Okay. Independence Day, Will Smith fans. I mean, does anyone know who Will Smith is still?
Yeah.
Oh, you do. Oh, you do. Oh, excuse me. Thank you for being. You remember that's from the '90s, woman. Who said that? Who said Fresh Prince of Bel Air? Ms. Walker?
I like a lot of older shows.
So do I. So do I.
Most of us know what finding shame.
What about '80s?
Yeah.
80s.
You know what show I love? Leave It to Beaver.
Oh,
That's my show.
really?
Yeah.
I mean, that was on TV when I was growing up, when I was a little kid. They still had those shows on television. Dennis the Menace, Leave It to
No,
Beaver,
That's my show.
Munsters, Three Stooges.
Yeah.
I had to wait to get Hulu to finally see them again.
No, they be on Tubi.
Well, yeah, but I didn't know about Tubi. I didn't have Tubi on my cable network. Yeah, I didn't have Tubi, but now I'm finding all this stuff that I watched when I was a kid and loved and forgot about, and now I can find them.
You
Most,
ever watch Touched by an Angel?
no.
It's really
Did anyone watch Seventh Heaven? Have you ever watched a young Jessica Biel? Oh, Jessica. Oh,
Oh.
you knew she was going to be a star. Seventh Heaven was too small. But what? She's a pretty woman. I
What's
thought
her
you-
name?
Huh?
What's her name?
Jessica Biel. Biel. So literature that kind of looks towards the end of the world, and there's nothing.
Her.
Let's see here. Oh yes, Jessica. Yeah. It's weird to see her so old. Just like it's weird to see what's her name, Emma Watson. Remember when she was just a little wiener in Harry Potter? There's a little kid running around, and then now she's like 30 something. Huh?
She's 35.
35. Wow. I saw her in the first Harry Potter film, and she's. Well, that'll happen to you people too. Yeah. Beyonce will start showing wrinkles, and you'll be like, wow. That's like, she isn't already. I don't know. Oh, okay. Well, she is.
Yeah.
All right. Apocalyptic, the end of the world. So we have the apocalypse according to John, which John, as you already know by now, is the closer. John is a common Jewish name, was a common Jewish name as Burris. So who knows which John it is? He just identifies himself as John. Could it be John the Apostle or some other John? Yes. Don't know. Okay? That's okay. It's called the Apocalypse or the Revelation of John. Apocalypsis in Greek simply means, an uncovering. Calypso, or is it, no, it's, or is it crypto? No, that's apocrypha. Calypso means to, uncover or take away the cover. So you're revealing. Okay, so it's also called the Book of Revealing or the Book of Revelation. And I'm not going to get too deeply. Well, I do still want to talk about that, so I guess I'll talk about that next week. But I'll finish with this. I'm not done. I'm just saying. Well, I am, but I'm done. Yes, but I'm not finished. Okay, so it's a later writing, one of the later writings of the New Testament, written around the 90s and the 100s. And this is the one that people all kind of love because it's got all sorts of weird, and people get scared about because it has all sorts of weird visions, supposedly about the end of the world coming about. And as I said, Jesus breaking all these seals of God's curses, so water turns into blood, and all the sea creatures, or a third of the sea creatures die. Stars fall out of heaven. The devil, the beast, and the false prophet start rampaging across the earth. Okay, fine. It could be the future for all I know. Sometimes it's intended to be in some apocalyptic literature. This is Christian apocalyptic, okay? But you had Jewish apocalyptic before, as I mentioned. The book of Daniel is an apocalypse, most of it. And in fact, the book of Revelation, scholars believe, was probably based on an originally Jewish apocalypse that some Jewish Christian came along later and Christianized. Anyways, So nevertheless, and you have apocalypses in other cultures as well. So Christianity, there's nothing new about it in the Bible. But it's not, it's usually meant to be about history that's going on then. It's not usually about the future. It could be, it couldn't. God may have his plans, but the person writing it, it's clear from the details. If you know the historical details of what were going on at the time, it's talking about the Roman Empire's persecution of the church. Okay, people are dying for their faith, having their heads chopped off or being crucified or whatever, fed to the lions, the wild animals, because they will no longer worship the gods of Rome or Greece. They will only worship Jesus and the God of Israel. And so they're being persecuted. This is all throughout the book of Revelation. It's all over the place. These great crowds of Christians who are dressed in white, who have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb who is Christ. They've given their lives for Christ. They've shed their blood for Christ. Okay. And it's even more obvious, and I'll just do this really quick because it is Halloween, when we talk about the beast, 666. 666. Why? It's not negative. So, well, it is kind of negative. It's in Hebrew numbers, numerology, it's a sign of imperfection. 7 is the number of perfection. So you take 1 away from 7, you get 6, it means imperfection. However, it's not 666. It's not the devil, Ms. Hoy. It's not Satan. It can't be. Because if you actually read the text in the book of Revelation, it says it's the number of a man. And the devil's an angel. He's not a man. He has no body. He's a spiritual creature, okay, without form. So it can't be a man. So it's a man, but it's apparently a bad man who will do bad things to the Christians. And why 666? Because if you count the numbers of his name, that's what Revelation says. If you count the numbers of his name, the total will, because each letter, remember Septuagint, L means 50, X means 10, I means 1 in Roman numerals. Oh, Hebrew and Greek numerals, the same thing. They didn't have Arabic numerals. They had to use letters, and they had assign a numerical value. So if you take the letters of this man's name and add them up, they come up to 666. Or they come up to 616. See, some of the manuscripts of the book of Revelation don't say 666. So then Iron Maiden has no song. 666, the number of the beast. You can't sing about the devil that way. You have to say 616, the number of the... And looky here. This is one of our earliest fragments of the book of Revelation, papyrus. And that's the form of the man's name. It's here, 616. That's who you have to be aware of, Ms. Hoy. Not the little kid with 666 tattooed on his head. It's 616. Last point, make it quick so you can go. Yes. Some candy on the way out. Because Nero Caesar, if you spell the name Nero Caesar, who was the emperor around that time, when we believe the book was written, you spell his name one way in Hebrew, it adds up to 666. But if you just make one little change in the letters, it adds up to 616. So are you starting to have it veil taken away? See what it's probably referring to? It also gives us an indication, Mr. Gaffney, of around the time period the book was at least written. Nero had to have been alive at the time, or around the year. I know, because I wasn't going to talk about it, but thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lacey. Keeping me honest. See you, Ms. Hoy. Bye. Have a good day. Have a good day. So what's the first? It said Portugal, but that's the monarchy of Portugal. It's not the modern Republic of Portugal. They got rid of the monarchy. Yeah, go ahead. Modern Portugal started in the 1940s when they got rid of the... Oh, no. No, the 1800s when they got rid of the monarchy, the end of the 1800s. Ah. See you next week. All right. See you. You're welcome. Let's have a good day. See you, Miss Farley.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
So the test for tomorrow online,
Yes.
The quiz's gonna be on what? Exactly.
It's going to be on who is Jesus
Okay.
and the Bible.
The Catholic Bible?
All the Bible, everything I talked about in class about the Bible.
The Bible, the two Bibles that I have?
No, the Bible in general. The idea of the Bible, what's in the Bible, what the Bible is, how the Christianity understands it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Ms. Burris,
Yes.
I have the lectures on YouTube, so if you go on my account on YouTube, there's a link on Canvas for my YouTube account. You go to the playlist, you start with the one for October 16th, yes? October 16th. Start with that one. And for that one and everything after it, that's all going to be on the test. You got it?
Got it, thank you.
All right.
What?
Oh, sorry. Is that Miss Kelsey? Really? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay. Let's go because I don't want to violate privacy. What I was thinking about your paper. Because if that happened, people movement by. But it's not in this. So I could do that, and then I think it was. Oh, come on in, lady. Is that correct? Am I remembering correctly? So with 210, so that's the 11th one day. That's the 12th, 13th. So that would basically happen 2.5 days late, which would be whatever. That's definitely. Would you rather I do 10? Then, and I'd still grade it. I would still grade it. Whatever grade you got, then 5, and then whatever 2.5 days late will get off that. I think it would be better than what you have now. But you won't go lower than what you. If it hurts, if it goes lower than that won't hurt. Is that all right? You still want to meet tomorrow to talk about it, or? Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Sure. This.